The eating disorders really had caught up with me. I was bulimic at that point, and I couldn't stop.
When I read your story in your book, it was so moving.
I was binging and purging, and that I had this black hole in my center.
I was really hoping you were going to share that because I think it's going to connect with so many people.
For me, talk therapy wasn't the way through. I wasn't able to change my mind or change my life.
Hello and welcome to all of you guys here on Love at First Science, and a special warm welcome to Jill Miller. Jill, thank you so much for giving up your time to come on the show. You're an absolute legend in the game. I'm so excited to share with you and to talk to you and learn from you. I thought a really cool way to start the podcast was to give you an opportunity to tell us a bit more about you and what's your story and how did you get to where you are now?
Whoa, that's a lot.
Come on, take us through it.
Oh my gosh. Well, first of all, thank you. I've been an admirer of yours for a very long time, and I love the fact that we both share a same publisher, Victory Belt.
Yes.
Did you know that?
I did, and I got so excited when your book came through.
Likewise, I got so excited when your book came through because hypermobility is one of my favorite topics that I don't really address at all in Body by Breath, although it's extremely relevant to people who are hypermobile. Gosh, my story. So I guess maybe I'll share the story of what brought me to the tale of Body by Breath and why this work has just been so important for me surviving my own life as somebody with a very high anxiety diet, a very embodied anxiety person from the get-go. I was an American kid, product of multiple divorces, lots of unexpected moves across state lines, lots of family being torn apart, pretty generally high ACE scores around that, and around a number of other things. But when I was in elementary school, we lived off the grid in a solar home in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I know you're European, so I don't know if you're familiar with Santa Fe, but it's a pretty amazing town in the Southwest. New Mexico is a very unpopulated state, but Santa Fe is known as being kind of like a hippie place, and the solar community or the solar industry was really booming there in the 70s. And so we lived in the solar home, off the grid, and we didn't have TV, and so in order to watch stuff, you'd have to bring in a video, like a Beta or whatever, Beta Max at the time. Then that became VHS. But I was a really overweight kid. I was a very scholarly kid, big thick glasses, big round shape, and I got teased a lot, chosen last. I was just that kid. I liked being with my dogs and my dolls. And one day my mom brought home the Jane Fonda workout video, and she brought home the Raquel Welch yoga video. So she wanted to get in shape. It was that moment in the world where Jane Fonda just broke through, and women of all shapes and sizes and ages suddenly wanted to get physical, and my mom was there. And I did the videos with her, and I was completely out of shape, but those videos inspired me to crawl into my body. And I lost weight, I developed an eating disorder, and I became obsessed with doing these videos back to back every day after school. Jane Fonda and then Raquel Welch, which was, if you're familiar with, you're probably not familiar with it because it got pulled off the market. Why? Because she was actually doing the Bikram series, and then he sued her, of course. And
no surprises there.
It was just kind of a fun story. So that's really what brought me into my body. And then I started pursuing all manner of yoga studies thereafter. So this was like 1984, 85. And I just pursued yoga and fitness throughout high school while battling these eating disorders. Finally, by the time I got to college, the eating disorders really had caught up with me. I was bulimic at that point, and I couldn't stop. And I had discovered live yoga classes by then, and I was doing work study at some studio, and I remember confessing to the teacher that I couldn't feel my abs, which I knew was important because I was, of course, in the dance department at college, and was taking Pilates, and you needed to engage your core to do it. And I never was sore, and everyone else around me, my roommate was sore, and I knew there was something wrong with that, but I also knew it was connected to the fact that I was binging and purging, and that I had this black hole in my center. And so I told her this, I confessed this to her, and she said, well, you should just lay face down on this prop. And she handed me this bean bag that looked like a hamburger bun, and it was a prop from the Iyengar yoga space. I was really into Iyengar at that time. And it was like this is like a headstand prop, I guess. And she said, lay belly down on this tool and breathe. And so I did, and I felt, but it did not feel good. It felt like, a brick in my gut, but that brick in my gut, that pain was finally felt. And I didn't just feel the physical pain, the visceral pain, but I also started to connect to what I was doing, the experience of my innards that I had been running from for all these years. And I started to do that in my dorm room. I would roll up a towel, not a brick. I'd roll up a towel and spin it into a cinnamon bun shaped prop. And I would wake up every morning, go to the bathroom, and then I would move this towel around my abdomen and breathe. And decades later, I have this gushy, soft ball called the gorgeous ball that we do visceral work and rib cage work. But this was really the origin story of how I recognized that for me, talk therapy wasn't the way through. I wasn't able to change my mind or change my life through talking to the counselors that I was going to. But going through my body, I was finally able to literally tune in. And what we could now say is, I had an interoceptive awakening. I was able to really make a connection from my body to my brain, to my soul, to my behavior, and start treating myself with the respect that I deserved.
When I read your story in your book, it was so moving. I was really hoping you were going to share that, because I think it's going to connect with so many people. Maybe they haven't got an eating disorder, but maybe they have tried talk therapy and they feel like they're stuck because it's not working for them. And I'm a big advocate for it, so I'm by no means knocking this as a modality to help people. But I also recognize the fact that we are all so complex and there's never just one way to get better. And the fact that you used, I would say, the simple act of connecting to your body through your breath, simple and yet so profound, that was the starting point for so much change for you.
Yes, but I had been breathing, Celeste, but I needed an amplifier.
And so
it's like the tool,
which
we use now, the ball, is like it's like a seashell, right? And it can amplify those voices that are screaming to be heard, that are screaming to say, I want to be with you. I'm with you. I'm not against you. Why are you forcing this upon me, right? Which is the chips or the ice cream or the too much bread or the starvation. Let's learn about each other. And so these tools are a way of literally creating that dialogue. And it's a pre-verbal dialogue. It's not necessarily like, hey, Jill, this is your small intestine here. I'd like to discuss a little bit more about how much salsa you had on the nacho platter last night.
I can never have that conversation because they'll just be shame.
Or whatever it is, right? So those unmet feelings, right? Of course. So I like to think of this as an amplification for the voices that really need to be heard, and it works. And the funny thing is, this is not a Bible for people with eating disorders, although it definitely helps those folks. But it's like, oh, guess what? This helped with my back pain, my knee pain, my neck pain, my heartache, my other related emotionally embodied pains.
I was going to call it a Bible for people.
There you go. That's fine.
I think so too. I know that obviously that was your story, that was your backstory,
Yes.
and that your book is actually so fantastic because, like you said, it does deal with so many other things. And the big thing that I picked out of it was how incredible it is that we can gain so much information about people's psychological states by observing their breath. I did respiratory placement, and it was fascinating meeting people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, emphysema, chronic bronchitis, and terrible asthma. to the point where they couldn't get to the toilet.
Oh,
And watching the shape change of their body was so fascinating. Like the
yes.
shape of their rib cage morphing over time. I was like, what? That is crazy. And I know you touch upon this extensively in the book, and I'd love to hand it over to you. Like, could you just educate us a little bit more? Potentially, how could we recognize this within ourselves if we don't maybe work with other people? But I think it's such a powerful platform for you to also share how people who are potentially yoga teachers, I know I've got a big yoga teacher audience that listens to this podcast, how could you empower them to use this information?
I simplify breathing for people by chunking it into what I call the 3 zones of respiration. And I think it's a really helpful model for being able to gauge within yourself where your breath feels at home, or for you to be able to observe movements, the movement of breath in the bodies that you teach. So the 3 zones of respiration, I think they're really easy to demarcate in your body. And you can do it right now while you're listening, whether you're driving, whether you're walking. The primary muscle of respiration is the respiratory diaphragm. And the diaphragm lives inside of the rib cage. It's attached circumferentially in the lower 6 ribs, a little bit at the bottom of the sternum at a thing called the xiphoid process. And then in the back, it has these 2 tails that end up hooking across some major important core muscles of your body, and then they tunnel on top of the lumbar spine, reaching down pretty far into your back. So we have a diaphragm that basically arises from your low back and then sits in this interesting dome shape inside the rib cage. And so when breathing actions occur, they're going to occur either below where that dome is. They're going to sit below the rib cage in what I call zone 1. And a zone 1 breath, we could also just say, oh, it's like a belly breath. It's like an abdominal breath. But when you breathe in a zone 1 way, the diaphragm contracts. And when it contracts, it pushes down. And in its down push, it ends up smushing all of the organs that are underneath it. And those organs have weight. They receive the pressure of the diaphragm, and they end up placing pressure all the way down through your pelvis to the pelvic floor. So we have this, sometimes people describe this as a piston effect. As the diaphragm descends, it kind of squishes the viscera, and there's a distending of your belly, your waist, even your low back a bit, and all the way down through the pelvic floor. And so some people describe that as 360 breathing. There's this ballooning because of the diaphragm's pressure down. But when this zone 1 breath is occurring, our body is in a calm state. It's in its most parasympathetic, relaxed state. And this is the kind of breath you see, when babies are asleep. You just see that little belly rising and falling. But if we are, this is our digestion state. This is our most meditative, sedated, relaxed state. But if, for whatever reason, the muscles and the fascia of the abdomen aren't particularly elastic, such as you're holding your belly in because you want to look skinny, or maybe your belly is involuntarily holding itself in because you've encountered some scary circumstance, or maybe your circumstance is perpetually scary, and so there is rigidity in your abdomen, or maybe you've overtrained your abdomen, like we see in a lot of
And over-cued, right?
certain populations that just are unable to let go of their core or their pelvic floor. Or maybe I've had a abdominal surgery, either a liver transplant or a C-section, or any type of lumbar surgery. I've been breached in my abdomen, or that below the rib cage zone, and I may have scar tissue that creates a little dysfunction in different abdominal layers. And you as a PT, you see this. And so the more rigid my zone 1, I will become a more dominant zone 2 breather. Zone 2 breathing is perfectly natural and normal in the right amount and the appropriate timing. But when I'm a zone 2 breather, I must not allow the diaphragm to descend into zone 1. Instead, my intercostals and the diaphragm are going to work together to upwardly rotate the ribs, to mini blind them out on inhale, and then on exhale, they'll fall in. And so I can get a really good volume into my lungs in a zone 2 breath. And this is absolutely critical for fitnessing, right? For lifting heavy things. You don't want to have this completely flaccid zone 1. You want to have tone in zone 1 to protect the structures of the pelvis and the lumbar spine. So you're going to need to breathe into your zone 2, right? We call this abdominal bracing or core bracing. The majority of the breath will happen in zone 2. When we're in zone 2 on a neurological identity, we're more uplifted, we're more sympathetic, we're more in a heightened state. And so this is, again, totally natural and totally normal. But if I'm perpetually in a sympathetic state or this heightened state, often what will happen is I'm more apt to go into a high stress state, very high stress, diabolical high stress, and that occurs in what I call zone 3 breathing. Zone 3 breathing happens above the rib cage, and this would be our clavicle, our shoulder, neck, jaw muscles start to get super involved with breaths that are short-lived, often accompanied with an open mouth, such as a gasp that you'll experiencing in fright, flight, or even delight, right? At the peak of an orgasm, you'll often have a zone 3 breath, but it's usually really short-lived. But like you said, you did that rotation where you were dealing with people with chronic asthma and COPD. The muscles of zone 3 are hypertonic, they are rigid, they are creating pain for the structures they connect to. So we can have really miserable neck pain, jaw pain, eye strain, ear ringing, shoulder pain. And of course, this has a ripple effect into all the structures below it, because if your life is running on overdrive, it's going to be really hard to get into your zone 2 and zone 1 breathing muscles. And it can really alter your health, right? This brings us into very high stress states, and that comes at a metabolic cost, and it comes at an immune system cost, and it comes at a relational cost, and so many other
psychological as well, right?
Unfortunate consequences of being in a zone 3 state. So I think at any given time of the day, you can observe your own wind instrument as it reacts to stresses from the external world as well as stresses from your internal world. And I think that's a great just phase 1 meditation. I call this witness breath. You just see, and none of it is wrong. It's responsive. But then we want to be responsible if we see that we're spending too much time in any one zone. We want to be dynamic in our ability to breathe into any of these zones.
Yeah, we need to be able to access all of them because they will all play a role depending on the context of what we're engaging with. So absolutely true. I mean, one of the things that you mentioned was that the whole book that you'd written, which was, guys, it's a Bible, right? You've got to, it's such a beautiful book because not only did you it really is a Bible, but it's such a great tool though, because it's one of those books that you can just open and then you can scan a QR code and watch a little lecture or enjoy a class or, you could there's just so much in there. It's insane. I mean, it should be double the thickness, but you've got the QR codes kind of helping us out with little additional tidbits. But after all that work, you said that you kind of came down to 5 main steps for the 5 Ps. I know that that's terribly reductionist. However, it is an opportunity to kind of tease people maybe to get the book, because these 5 Ps are really practical steps that they can use to help them. And could you walk us through those, please?
Yeah, it's 480 pages of a book, but it really does boil down to actionable stuff. And I boil it down to 5 Ps. And if you can remember these, then I think you can really have mastery over circumstances when you find yourself going from zone 2 to zone 3 and feeling completely out of control. The 5 Ps are an actionable thing that you can do when you start to feel yourself going from zone 2 to zone 3, feeling out of control. There are some tangible physical things that you can do for your body that will flip the switch. And the switch that I'm talking about is flipping on your off switch. So we want to be able to reduce that sympathetic overflow and enhance a parasympathetic opportunity to help you calm down so that you can make reasonable decisions and have a next moment that is better than the last. So the 5 Ps start with place. Place. In order for you to be able to downshift, it's helpful if you're in a place that is safe for you. Now, most of the time when we flip out, we're nowhere near a safe place. So sometimes it takes imagination or even, and this is going to sound super woo-woo, but even throwing around yourself an idea that you're surrounded by light or a color or there's a zone of safety around you. For example, if you're an educator and you're working at a loud, clanky gym and you're trying to create a zone of safety for students, you can like loop some straps around a corner of the gym, even though the loud, clanky noise is over there. You can say within here, we're going to be doing a practice to help downshift. So ideally, you have a P, you have a place that is safe for you, that can give you the environment of safety. The second P is perspective. Perspective has to do with a mindset. So even though the book is called Body by Breath, it does help if your awareness is on board with that, right? So there's a cooperation from your attention, from your awareness into your body. So for example, a perspective could be one that I've been using since I released the book. All of me is welcome here. All of me is welcome here. And I have to remind myself of that because even though I've written 2 huge books and I've written in medical textbooks, and I still sometimes feel inadequate. So all of me is welcome here helps me when I'm about to give a presentation or meet new people or meet my idols. It helps. So some type of mindset, some other mindsets or perspectives that students have donated to the book. The book is full of these perspectives. For example, my breath is home. That could be one. If I'm really wanting to connect with breathing, my breath is home. Another that a student donated is I validate myself. Another one that's really helpful if you're trying to learn to tune in is I am listening to you. And then you would put your own name. So if Celeste were saying, she's like, I'm listening to you, Celeste. So, those are really helpful. They can be very, very potent. And if those of you who are yoga people, I've borrowed this from Sankalpa. So Sankalpa meaning the resolve above all other resolves. So where 1 is place, 2 is perspective. 3 is position. When we employ position, this is talking about our physical body parts in relationship to gravity. The most relaxation my body can get, your body can get, is to get grounded. So if I can recline, or even better than recline, if I can put myself into a gentle slope where the pelvis is just a little higher than the heart, higher than the head, this helps to set the stage for something called the baroreceptor reflex, which ends up creating a pressure gradient specifically in the top of the heart and the sides of the neck, and there's a slowing down of the heart rate once this baroreceptor reflex is aroused. And this slowing down of the heart rate and slowing down of the breath rate is courtesy of the vagus nerve. And this is really, this gentle slope position is all because your body doesn't want to have more blood in the brain than it can manage. And so once you're in this gentle slope and that flood of blood, gravity takes your blood and starts to migrate it towards the top of the heart and towards the side of the neck, those pressure sensors say, oh, we can't have this much blood. I need to narrow the blood vessels. I need to slow down the heart stroke so that I don't overflood my brain. So this is just I'm sharing the neurophysiology of it because it's like such a profound tool, but it's kind of a guarantee every time. So
you just got brilliant.
So we have place, perspective, position. Now, there's a lot in the book that deals with position. There's even more things you can do physically in your body with position that can also induce or arouse a vagal response. But I don't know, maybe we'll come take my training and we can go over those things.
Let's do it.
They're subtle. Okay, so we've got position. The fourth, gosh, we're finally at the fourth, pace of breath. So pace of breath has to do with your breathing strategies. The book is full of breathing strategies, mostly about getting you to relax. There's only one strategy about arousal in the book. The rest is really about drousal, because the book is not so much about building your ability to go for it, do more. It's about trying to help quell, to build resilience in your ability to tolerate parasympathetic dominant states. I think most of us are really good at tolerating arousal states. I mean, that's kind of that's what we live in. But to be able to run a marathon in your relaxation response and stay aware, that's some monk level ninja shit that I'd like to be able to champion, because I think that truly builds better resilience.
Monk level ninja shit. That's what I want for my life, Jill.
Okay, that can be the podcast title.
I think this. Let me just write that down.
You heard it here first. So pace of breath, typically extended exhales are going to bring about vagal dominance, but some people can have paradoxical responses to that. But also there's other ways, there's so many different ways to breathe that can create a relaxation response, and this is something that I talk through in the book. But in general, longer exhales. The fifth P is what I'm also most passionate about, is palpation. So palpation brings us into the conversation of using tools to maneuver your fascial tissues in a variety of ways that can also help reduce sympathetic tone, high stress, and improve so many other factors of your body in terms of your movement, your feelings of well-being, your ability to actually lift and move heavy things, or have more precision in your movements. So the palpation is just this, it's not an add-on. I see it as a necessary thing, because we can also press, that's another P, press tools or objects into different zones, these zones that I talked about, zones 1, 2, and 3, to place mechanical pressure on portals where the vagus nerve is available that can also help offer some stimulation to our relaxation body.
Could you give us 3 portals that we could access our vagus nerve?
Yeah. So there's one of the things that I became really known for early on in my career, not early on, maybe like mid on in my career, was this abdominal massage that I was describing earlier. I shared it with my friend Kelly Starrett, who's the founder of CrossFit. At the time it was called Mobility WOD, but now his new brand is called the Ready State. And so he and I had become acquainted through a mutual friend about 15 years ago. And I traveled north. I was teaching up there. Excuse me, I'm in California. So when we say traveling north, everyone already knows where you've gone. I live in LA, he lives in San Francisco. So this is about 6 hours away. I was teaching in the area of San Francisco. And so I went to visit him and showed him a few things. I showed him this abdominal massage, and on YouTube he was like, Jill's teaching me how to gut smash. And so that's where gut smash suddenly became like this thing in the CrossFit space. I never called it gut smash because I tend to talk to my tissues in a less aggressive way. Yeah, and I'm from the yoga space, so I just use different terms. So this variation of a gut smash, I call it gut baby. And I think it's a really lovely way for people to migrate into zone 1. They can just lay on their side, and you want to take either like a Coregeous ball, which is my tool. I grab one, hang on. So what I'm grabbing, for those of you that aren't watching, is my tool, which is a Coregeous ball. This is like a Pilates ball or a Gertie ball, and it's a grippy, very soft rubber air-filled ball. And what's great about an air-filled ball is you can modify the inflation, right? So I can unplug it and have it with less air, or I could overpack it with air and make it a a firmer tool. So you can really modify it based on your tolerance. So for gut baby, you would lay on your side, put a little something underneath your head so you're comfortable, and then take the Coregeous ball, not on your waist, but migrate your waist slightly forward so that you can essentially load your soft baby center belly on top of the ball. In gut baby, we want to create a traction of the abdomen forward, away from the body, and then let the ball hold on to our organs instead of letting our pelvis and our abdominal muscles have to sustain them, which they always do. So it's almost like, let me just have somebody else hold on to my organs for like an organ transplant. But what happens there, you're allowing the small and large intestine to traction away from the mesenteric root. And it's just this unbelievable release feeling of letting your organs have a little unusual stretch. Like maybe you give yourself a side bend, you give yourself a back bend, but we don't often experience a traction event like this there.
That's really powerful.
It's really powerful. And then what I'll do, I have pictures of it in the book, is I just then bring my top hand on top of the other side of the belly. And this is done against the skin because you want to have the rubber against the skin and then your own skin, your hand skin against the belly. And this is an example of some of the practices, that I did years ago when I was suffering so much. And then just starting a dialogue, like listening, what does the gut baby want to say? And a lot of times the gut baby is going to say, blurk, 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 and you'll start hearing, yes.
But actually that's a sign that you're shifting into parasympathetic when you start hearing the stomach digesting.
Ding, ding, ding,
that's
ding, ding.
That's actually a positive thing. Whenever I hear my tummy gurgling, I'm like, yes.
Exactly.
I'm switching.
And then you would hang out there for, whatever, 5 minutes, 7 minutes, whatever time, and then flip to the other side. You want to give the do on the other side. And I would suggest starting on the left side first, just to help any gas that's in the sigmoid colon to pass. And that is a very good sign. If the gas is passing, it's not trapped and creating, visceral misery for you.
You're making me feel so good about how gassy I am.
Well, that's for the GI doc, but like this is and so I think this is a really doable one. And if you don't have an air-filled ball, you can do this with a pillow or a rolled up towel or a rolled up blanket, but you do want to have something that can essentially offload your abdomen.
I'm going to do this as soon as we get off this call. I'm getting my cushions out and I'm going to be smushing myself.
Yeah.
In the most loving way.
In the most loving way. Yeah. And then for, there's so many. In the book, I have rollouts for zone 1, zone 2, and zone 3. So that are to stimulate your relaxation response. For zone 2, and in fact, I even have a video on YouTube called Vegas Voyage that describes some of what I'm talking to you about. And there's so many videos on YouTube, but Vegas Voyage is a really good one to look up. For zone 2, you can anywhere the ball goes on your rib cage is going to be sufficient because your lungs are loaded with sensory bits of the vagus. Your heart is loaded with a big motor fiber on the sinoatrial node, but you also have baroreceptors right in that same region, what I was describing before, like the baroreceptor reflex. So we can get some effects all over the lungs and the heart by either, you can lay on your side on the rib cage. I like to lay directly on my sternum, like face down, if you can tolerate that, and work with my breath there. So there's lots of different ways you can work with your breath there. You can just witness the breath, or you can try to create shape changes in the rib cage with your breathing. You can hold your breath, you can contract the muscles, or you can just kind of squish and have a makeout session with the ball. But this is a really great way to stimulate the vagus there, and it's also going to create, for many people, a tremendous amount of thoracic stiffness reduction. So they're going to get a lot of mobility out of the thoracic spine because we're directly targeting the ribs, and the ribs hook right into the spine. So you get like this bonus helping with kyphotic stresses and so on. And then for the neck area, or for zone 3, a great vagal portal. I could go over something with the Coregeous ball again, like really simple. In the book I call neck anew, which is sticking the ball to the side of the neck and twisting it into the skin and what's known as the carotid sheath, and then rotating the head back and forth. But that's a great one. But for my money, what I really love to do is I like to plant a yoga tune-up ball, which is, I should have brought all my balls up here. They're all on the floor back there. A smaller,
just imagine it's a small ball.
small, gushy, grippy rubber ball, and I put it in what I call the neck jacuzzi. So if you go right over the collarbone and right in front of the scapula, you have another diaphragm, essentially. We have the cervical thoracic diaphragm. We have kind of these horizontal fibers of the scalenes, as well as some of this sheath of the carotid that I mentioned. Lots of different tissues to tamp into here, as well as the first and second rib. The ball goes there, and then you can lean into a corner. I call this neck gnar in the book. But that's a really great way to get a sense of the upper limits of breathing without deflecting into zone 3 stress breathing. So you really get the first and second rib going. But the pressure there is going to tug on the same region of the vagus nerve that's affected by the pressures in the baroreceptor situation that I explained before. So we can have this mechanical pressure rather than blood pressure, but it's going to do the same thing. And you'll get changes in your shoulder, changes in your neck, changes in your breath, and changes in your relaxation response.
Amazing. And actually, you were talking about baroreceptors of the heart. You were talking about the tilt. And I actually did want to ask you a little bit about the heart rate variability, because I'm so fascinated by this topic. And could you just lightly just give us a brief introduction about it, to just explain exactly what it is and maybe how we can affect it somehow?
Oh, so heart rate variability has to do with the fact that unless you are living a life of complete unchecked stress, you probably don't have a heart rate that's above 100, 110 chronically. If you didn't have two different inputs into your heart, a sympathetic input and a parasympathetic input, you would just have this off the charts 120 heartbeats per minute. I don't care who you are, what you are. But it's because we have the firing of the vagus nerve on the heart that it slows down that sympathetic overdrive. And with vagal input on the heart, we have a heart rate that varies anywhere at a normal resting heart rate, right? It's between 60 and 80 heartbeats. I think mine's like 71, or if I'm in a good meditation, I'm a lot lower than that. But I have to do some work to lower that. So the heart rate variability refers to, though, the beat-to-beat changes within the heart. We can get a big generic wrapping around that to talk about HRV, but every heartbeat is a little bit different than the one before it. The neural influences on the heart are going to make beat-to-beat changes upon the heart. One of the biggest ways that you can make influences, or one of the biggest ways that you can induce influences on your nervous system to influence the heart, is riding your breath in such a way to amplify the vagal inputs on the heart. Because as I mentioned, because we have a vagus nerve that is functional, we have a heartbeat that's under 100 beats per minute, right? We're in that 60 to 80 range. So I think it was in, oh my gosh, dates, times, is it 1920? I don't know, it's in the book. I can't remember the date. But there is a German scientist who actually discovered that your breathing has its own arrhythmia that works itself out with the heart. And this is known as the respiratory sinus arrhythmia. And I can describe it as this. When you inhale, you reduce the vagal input on the heart. And as you're inhaling, your heart beats faster. When you exhale, the vagus starts to come back online and your heartbeat starts to slow down. Now, if you're a really sensitive meditator and breather, you can actually check this out for yourself. You can do, in the yoga space, we have this thing called Jnana Mudra, where your index and thumb finger touch, or you can even put your own hand on your carotid or on your wrist or even on your heart. And you can take breaths, and you can feel that as you're inhaling, your heartbeat starts to go bump, 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 bump. And then when you exhale, it goes bump, bup, bup, bup. You'll start to feel the delay. Now, it's only the most highly sensitive people that can pick up on that. This has to do with the faculty of interoception. So it's not really easy to sense that this arrhythmia is happening or occurring. But the arrhythmia is happening, or the signal to the heart is changing because of the way the diaphragm, the physical diaphragm, enrobes and encases the heart. Now, this is going to be completely crazy to those of you who aren't anatomy geeks, but your heart sits on top of the diaphragm like a mattress. Like the diaphragm is a mattress for the heart. And there's this sheet, like a pillowcase, arising from the diaphragm. It's called the pericardium. It's a connective tissue sheath that wraps around the heart. And so you can't have movements of the diaphragm that don't include movements of the heart. Now that sounds like a terrible idea. Why would you want your heart to move? Like,
You want it. Yeah.
It's moving. Everything's moving in your body. There's nothing inert. Your brain's not inert. Your brain's moving with every breath you take too. Yeah. Like everything is affected by the plunging of your diaphragm and your breathing mechanics. That's why it's a body by breath. But in terms of HRV and respiratory sinus arrhythmia, let's try to tie this all together. So as the diaphragm descends, it is tractioning on the pericardium. It's tractioning on the sheath surrounding the heart. And the heart temporarily enlarges. Well, this is a terrible idea because an enlarged heart needs more blood. And so the heart starts to beat faster because of those mechanical stresses of stretch occurring there. Tell the brain, very short feedback loop, must get more blood in. And so it contracts faster. We've got more blood pumping. When the body has sufficiently filled with air, when the brainstem has determined, oh, we've got enough oxygen here, we can start to offload now. That signal is turned off, and the blood is now overfilled with blood. It's full. And so there's a slowing down. The vagus nerve takes over. There's a slowing down because we want to conserve energy anyway. Our body is an energy conservation machine. And so that heart rate slows down. And that's what's going to show up as both the respiratory sinus arrhythmia, but also that is included into overall HRV, heart rate variability. If you want to learn more about this, the man who first calculated the mathematics around HRV, his name is Dr. Stephen Porges. And he happens to be also the father of this modern theory of the vagus nerve called polyvagal theory that I include in my book. But I am by no means I
mean, come on. You know what's so funny, guys? Listen to this. Before we got on this call, I was running through some of the things I wanted to ask Jill, and she's like, oh, no, I'm no expert. I think everyone listening to that explanation, which was super clear and helped us understand it better than anyone has ever explained it, will agree you're an expert. Can you just say the name of the man again?
Well, Dr. Stephen Porges.
Yeah. Say again, Steve?
Dr. Stephen Porges, who's also...
Porgous?
No, Porges. He is also the man who coined the term polyvagal theory, which is embedded in some of the modeling in my book as well. But I think it was in the 1970s, he and a teammate worked this thing out, and they were able to come up with some of the original data that helped people to understand how to calculate heart rate variability.
Amazing. We'll definitely check him out. And actually, one of the questions that I had to ask you, because a bunch of people said, please can you get Jill to talk about mouth breathing? Because it was so funny. I've interviewed both Patrick McEwen and James Nestor on the show. And obviously, I'm a huge proponent of nasal breathing. I even do all my cardiovascular activities with nasal breathing, which, let me tell you, is
wow, you're amazing.
Humbling at first. I do a lot of air hunger drills. But the other day I was listening to a podcast, and the guy was like, oh yeah, we need to breathe through our mouths because it helps us regulate our temperature. I was like, that's dogs, not humans. And also, being someone who's nasal breathed so much, particularly in very hot settings and in very physically demanding settings, it's helped my recovery be so fast. And I was like, maybe we just need to get Jill to kind of be like, what? Like, what's your take on this, Jill?
Oh, so, breathing is critical to living. And so your body is going to do anything it can to get to the next breath. And if it makes it more sense for a body to get breath in through the mouth, it's going to do that. If it makes more sense for the body to get breath in through the nose, it's going to do that. It's amazing that we have two different ways to get air in. Like, that's like amazing, right?
Yeah, so
But but there's some drawbacks to exclusively mouth breathing, and there's some real benefits to doing nose breathing. I'm doing a combination right now of nose breathing and mouth breathing while we're having this interview, and so are you. Sometimes I'm taking short, gaspy breaths through my mouth to maybe stimulate a thought, or maybe I'm a little perplexed and I'll find myself taking a quick mouth breath. But for the most part, I'm breathing through my nose, in through my nose, and I'm exhaling through my mouth in these long-winded sentences as I talk to you. When I sing, sometimes I'll take mouth breaths also, because I need to get a really quick breath in for the next note. So it's not totally dysfunctional to breathe through the mouth. When we're eating, a lot of times we'll also, sometimes get breath in the nose, sometimes get breath in the mouth. So I'm not sure about the hot weather thing, though. Like that, I'm not following at all because of the amount of dehydration that's going to happen through the mouth. I'm like really confused by that. Your dog.
It was a thermoregulator. I was like, definitely dogs, but humans, I'm not so sure about that, mate.
Well,
because we thermoregulate through our skin.
I mean, maybe towards like, now I'm like thinking like stages of death, like maybe like, you know what I mean? Like complete involuntary mouth breathing at a certain point. Okay, so let's talk about mouth breathing. I mean, let's talk about nose breathing as beneficial, or the benefits of nose breathing. There's so many listed in the book, and I'll just see what I can remember from my brain here. One of the primary specialnesses of nose breathing is that it's directly connected to our brain centers, or the brain center concerned with olfaction. And so olfaction is about smelling, and smelling is so primal for our survival as a species, for any species. It's leading with their nose and sniffing out prey, predator, food, safety, and so on. And it's so primary for our emotional well-being as well as our ability to function in an environment. So smell is said to be on board as soon as one is born, whereas vision is not so much. It's how we can identify our mother's body, or our primary caretaker's body is through smell, through olfaction. Other than olfaction, like you said, when we breathe through our nose, it raises the temperature, or it corrects the temperature of the air so that it is perfectly tolerated in the lining of our lungs. And by the time it's gotten to our lungs, our nose has so many cilia and mucus trappings that can help be a first line of defense against pathogens in the environment. So it's dust, virus, good luck with that. Dust, virus, bacteria, fungi, whatever bugs that might want to intrude into our lives. Nose breathing also on a musculoskeletal level is really beneficial because it uses the diaphragm in the most economical way. When you breathe through your mouth, the diaphragm doesn't need to really exercise itself very much. You can get a mouth breath in, as I described earlier, through your neck and mouth and jaw muscles, and that's very costly metabolically. So we're much more efficient breathers by using the diaphragm. And what a diaphragm breath will do is it'll drag air into more remote regions of the lungs, and so we have a better oxygen blood perfusion exchange that can happen in more areas of the lungs than in just the limited area of the upper lung. And the upper lung is not the best place for oxygen and blood to have, oxygen, carbon dioxide to have its exchange, because our blood tends to be most optimized in the midsection of the lungs. So you have to look at gravity again when we're talking about where we have the best ratio across the membrane barrier of air and blood exchange. And that's not in the upper portion where we're less vascularized. In the lower portion, sometimes we have too much blood or fluid sitting there, but in the mid-range of the lungs, we have this best place for oxygen exchange. So we have a musculoskeletal benefit, we have a chemical balance benefit for our blood, we have these keeping the nasal apparatus unclogged, and as well as that immune system defense. So there's just lots of things. The other thing that I know James talked about in his book was this nitric oxide stimulation, which is when we nasal breathe, there's a release of nitric oxide, and that helps with vasodilation all over the body, which is good. The vasculature remains open and blood circulates more freely. But the other thing that releases nitric oxide into your blood is fascial friction. And so that's why, breathing is not just a nose to lungs event. I want to make sure that there are other virtues of breathing that could show up, certainly from my book, from my perspective, show up all over the body. And when we do things that stimulate our connective tissue through friction, we're releasing nitric oxide. So think of yourself rolling in a friction-based way and nasal breathing, then you're like, yeah, you're in a total open ocean of your blood flow.
Yeah, that sounds good. Okay, what if you had a child who had fallen into the habits of mouth breathing and they may be sick? How can you help them retrain nasal breathing?
Oh man, this is a really complicated one.
Yeah.
This is a really complicated question. They need to be taken to an ENT. They need an assessment. There could be so many different things going on. They could be obstructed in their nose. They could have enlarged tonsils or adenoids that could be preventing them from having an ease of nose breathing. They could have some type of structural trauma from birth that didn't really show up until age 2 or 3. I tell my son's story in the book. My son was having sleep apneas that were absolutely frightening, and he always was congested. I was always snot sucking him. I don't know if you guys have that tool in the UK, but in the US we have this thing where you can actually put a little tube up the kid's nose and just suck the snot out. He was always congested, and I was blaming myself all the time. Like, it must be something I'm eating. I must be contributing an allergen to him. But right before the pandemic, I was timing his apneas. He would go without breath for like 27 seconds. And when I finally timed it, that's when I was like, I got to see an ENT. This is crazy. He's not just a snorer. There's fitful sleep. He is also on the underside of the growth chart. So he was having all sorts of symptoms of failure to thrive, frankly. And then I have to teach breathing, right? So I took my kid to an ENT in Los Angeles. His name is Dr. Zaghi. He has a place called the Breathe Institute. I never in a million years suspected what the condition was that was creating this breathing challenge for him. But he had tonsils that were the size of chicken eggs in the back of his little baby throat. And he had to have an emergency tonsillectomy. It was the best possible choice. And over the years since then, I just keep working with him on strengthening muscles of the face, strengthening his tongue, doing singing exercises, neck movements, and all sorts of things. But I trick him. I don't tell him, okay, we're going to do training now, because when I did try to do that, it didn't work. So I've had to figure out different ways to work with him. And there are pediatric occupational therapists out there. There are so many brilliant trained people. What are the tongue people called?
I don't know these tongue people.
Oh, they're fantastic. Anyway, so there's lots of people out there that can help. But first, you've got to get an assessment and figure out, because it could be, allergies. Turns out my son is like level 4 allergic to walnut. Well, guess what tree is outside of his bedroom?
Oh,
a walnut tree.
No wonder the poor kid was so overloaded.
And I thought it was the cream in my friggin' coffee.
Oh, it's so good that you did think broadly, though, about all the contributing factors. And that just shows just how complex the human body is. And we can never jump to conclusions or assumptions, that we have to keep such an open mind when dealing with a human body, because we just know so little, even though we know so much.
Celeste. And then the process of ruling out. So I wish you all the best, but definitely start that process, because it is the tissues, the soft tissues and the bones of the face are very malleable, but right now they're forming around mouth breathing. And mouth breathing is highly associated with ADHD and a number of other failure to thrive conditions that could really be curtailed by making these adjustments early on. So I wish you the best.
Yeah, I think Patrick McEwen has a really handy tool that he provides for children, because one of his big suggestions, which I've taken on board, is actually mouth taping, particularly at night. And he developed mouth tape for kids, which is really cool because
Oh, he
it
did.
goes on the, yeah, it goes on the side, and it basically relaxes their lips into a closed position. But if they want to speak or eat, they can. So
Yeah.
it doesn't feel restrictive or scary. I
Yeah.
thought that was really clever.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I looked into different mouth tape strategies for him, but I really ultimately decided against it because he was too young. Yeah, you have to now he could do it. He's 7, but my son came up with a mouth tape idea for himself for another reason, which is he couldn't keep his mouth shut in class. And we were getting a lot of calls from the teacher. And so
I
he came
love
up with the
that.
idea of taping his
Where
mouth
did he
shut.
get
I
that
was
from,
like,
Jill?
he came up with the idea of taping his mouth shut in school. And I was like, this is great. I've been waiting for this moment because I want him to do that anyway so that he starts to become a
Fantastic. And
dominant.
it's good that he led that. That's amazing. Jill, we are running out of time. So before we log off, I just want to ask you a question I ask all my guests, which is, if you had a message for the world and you could send it to every single person just to make this world a bit of a better place, what would your message be?
Oh, honey,
I know.
I hate
I do it
these.
to everyone. You
I
can
really
see everyone
do.
does.
I really, everybody doesn't
I mean,
like.
think about what you would want your little boy to kind of grow up with as the one tool that he can always hold on to that's from you.
Yeah. Your body has a secret. What does it want to share with you?
That's beautiful. I think we've found the perfect way to segue to the final portion, which is, where can people find out more about you, Jill?
I am based in Los Angeles, California, but I have a very robust online classroom. My website is tuneupfitness.com, and I teach new classes every week at what's called the Move, Breathe, Roll classroom, and it's also a mentor program. So once a cycle, I get together and I answer questions from students around the world. I create classes based on their needs. The book is Body by Breath. I have a competency program, a 3-day competency program around that. It's offered online twice a year. And then I have 2 other competency courses that I teach. One's called the Role Model Method Training, and that has to do with my approach to self-myofascial release. And the other is the Yoga Tune-Up Teacher Training. And these are offered, all of these are offered both in person and online, twice a year online, and then probably once a year in person. I'll be teaching in Chicago the Role Model Training in September.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom with us, Jill. It's been an absolute pleasure learning from you, and I can't recommend your courses enough. You are such a thought leader, helping to really provide the highest level of education for all of us. So thank you so much for the work you've done.
Oh, thank you so much, Celeste. I'm so happy you're out there doing what you're doing too. You're a treasure.